Can you even fight? My cousin laughed across the crowded bar. Everyone around us chuckled as he looked me up and down, convinced I was just another quiet woman trying to sound tough. I smiled and took a sip of my drink. Only hand to hand. Knives were optional. The table erupted with laughter. Then he smirked and asked the question that changed the entire night. "What did they call you?" I answered with one word. Hades. A retired Navy SEAL sitting 3 stools away suddenly froze. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. And in that moment, everyone stopped laughing. Interested strong story with strong base. The whole situation started during a family reunion weekend that my aunt had organized near the coast. Most of my relatives had not seen me in years because my work kept me traveling overseas. To them, I was simply the quiet cousin who disappeared for months at a time and never talked much about her career. Whenever anyone asked what I did, I usually gave vague answers because explaining the truth often created more questions than I wanted to answer. That evening, several family members decided to visit a waterfront bar overlooking the harbor. The atmosphere was lively, music echoed through the room, and conversations blended together beneath the warm lights. My cousin Brandon had always enjoyed being the center of attention, and after a few drinks, he began telling exaggerated stories about street fights he supposedly won during college. Everyone listened while he acted like some undefeated champion. Eventually, his attention shifted toward me. With a grin, he pointed across the table and asked if I had ever been in a real fight. I shrugged and told him I had experienced enough conflict for one lifetime. Instead of letting the conversation move on, Brandon leaned forward and challenged me. He joked that I probably spent my days sitting behind a desk and that I looked far too polite to survive a serious confrontation. The table laughed. Rather than getting offended, I simply smiled. Years of training had taught me that confidence rarely needed an audience. That calm response only encouraged him more, and soon he was turning me into the evening entertainment. The teasing continued for several minutes before Brandon asked if I could actually fight. I answered casually that I preferred hand-to-hand and that knives were optional. The words sounded ridiculous coming from someone who looked completely relaxed, which made the table burst into laughter. Brandon nearly spilled his drink as he mocked me. Then he jokingly asked whether my teammates had called me princess. The room erupted again. I could have ignored him, but something about his confidence amused me. Without changing my expression, I looked him directly in the eyes and answered with a single word. Hades. The reaction was immediate and completely unexpected. A man sitting at the bar, several feet away, suddenly turned around so fast that his chair scraped across the floor. He stared at me with disbelief. His drink slipped from his fingers and shattered. The room fell silent. The man slowly approached our table and asked where I had received that call sign. Brandon laughed at first, assuming this was some kind of joke, but the stranger was not smiling. There was genuine recognition in his eyes. The man introduced himself as a retired Navy SEAL. He explained that years earlier he had worked alongside several special operations groups during overseas missions. According to him, certain call signs became legendary because they were associated with people who repeatedly accomplished the impossible. He looked at me for several seconds before quietly mentioning details from an operation that had never appeared in any public report. Brandon's grin disappeared. My relatives exchanged nervous glances. For the first time all night, nobody had anything to say. I tried changing the subject, but the retired operator would not let the moment pass. He spoke respectfully and described how stories about a woman known as Hades had circulated among military communities for years. He said people admired her because she consistently protected others while refusing recognition afterward. Listening to him felt uncomfortable because I had never enjoyed discussing those experiences. Yet every word he shared caused Brandon's confidence to shrink. The cousin who had mocked me all evening now looked like he wished he could disappear beneath the table. The tension reached its peak when Brandon finally asked whether the stories were true. I told him that most legends become exaggerated over time, but some experiences leave permanent marks regardless of how often they are retold. I explained that real strength was not about winning bar arguments or impressing strangers. It was about staying calm when lives depended on your decisions. The retired SEAL nodded in agreement. The entire room remained silent as the meaning behind those words settled in. Before leaving, the retired operator shook my hand and thanked me for things he said many people would never know about. Then he walked away. Brandon stared at the floor for several moments before quietly apologizing. There was no anger in his voice anymore, only respect. For the first time in years, he understood that appearances rarely reveal the full story. The strongest people in a room are often the ones who feel no need to prove themselves. As we left the bar that night, Brandon stopped beside me and admitted he had judged me completely wrong. I told him that most people do. The harbor lights reflected across the water as we walked toward the parking lot, and neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he asked one last question. Was that retired Navy SEAL serious? I smiled, the same smile I had given him at the beginning of the night, and I simply replied, "You tell me."